So here we are in the second game, and it's once again Capablanca, and actually his opponent's defeat came in a very similar fashion to Frederick Yates's defeat in the first game that we examined. Here we can see that so far Black has moved, I should say Capablanca had the white pieces, and his opponent Jacques Mieses, I'm not sure am I pronouncing his name correctly, but nevertheless, his opponent has moved 2 pawns thus far, and both of the pawns are on light squares. So we must be a little bit careful if we're Black to not continue to put all of our pawns on light squares at the expense of the dark squares. However, there are concrete reasons why you may wish to put a pawn on a light square, and here, for example, Black played the move a6, putting a third one on a light square, and it offers such possibilities as d takes c4, and after bishop takes c4, b5, for example. And after a retreat of the bishop, then bishop to b7 would facilitate the development of this bishop on c8. So there are, of course, reasons why you may wish to put your pawns on the light squares, but you need to be a little bit careful, otherwise you may create more weaknesses on the dark squares than you can handle. So here c takes d5, e takes d5, and queen to b3. Capablanca's last move is targeting this pawn on d5 and tempting Mieses into playing the move c6, which he does so. And now we notice this structure, all of the pawns on light squares, and it's a little bit reminiscent of the previous position. Capablanca plays bishop to d3, and here Black plays knight h5, voluntarily, agreeing to the exchange of the dark squared bishops. However, we notice one thing, which is White's pawns are primarily on dark squares themselves. So he's actually very, very happy to have the light squared bishop, whereas Black is going to have a little bit more trouble because his pawns are, almost all of them are on light squares with one exception, and he is left with the light squared bishop. He would much rather have a dark squared bishop as long as this point here was defended on b7, and then we could speak of equality or maybe even a slight Black advantage. However, of course, as things stand, I should say that already the position is a little bit problematic for Black, and he should be very, very careful with these dark squared weaknesses here on the queen side. Let's watch now how Capablanca actually mises for these weaknesses. Castle, knight f6, knight a4, immediately targeting b6 and c5. Black plays knight e4, and remember, knights on a light square will control dark squares, and knights on dark squares will control light squares. So Capablanca is perfectly happy to actually give up his bishop in order to strengthen his grip on those dark squares, and now queen b4, transferring the queen over from a light square to a dark square, will actually serve the purpose of strengthening the dark squares. Notice how White's approach is extremely logical and extremely consistent with this strategy of trying to punish the opponent for the way that he has arranged his pawns and the consequent dark squared weaknesses that accompany this arrangement. Black went queen g6 and now queen e7, f6, and now rook c3. Notice the way in which White is actually maneuvering with his pieces. The queen is moving on dark squares, the rook is moving on dark squares, and even this knight is, although placed on a light square, it's really only hitting dark squares, and so it can be said to be moving along the dark squares in similar fashion to the queen and rook as well. After queen e8, queen to d6, rook f7, rook f to c1. All of the white heavy pieces are on dark squares, and much like in the previous game that we examined, this bishop on c8 remains unable to move. Why is it struggling to move? Well, because the knight and the pawn are impeding. It's restricting its movement. But if the knight is to move, the problem is that knight to b6 will occur, and that's why Black is staying put. So we can see that actually the inability of the bishop to move along this diagonal is a consequence of the knight being placed here, and the inability of this knight on d7 to move is a consequence of the problems on b6, and the weakness on b6 is a consequence of these two advances, right? So everything is interrelated, and so therefore it's hard to delineate between what is a structural problem and what is a development problem or a minor piece problem, etc. As you can see, and it's a theme that I've mentioned, I've discussed on more than one occasion so far in this positional chess series. Black here played the move queen to f8, and after queen takes f8, check, king takes f8, white here, we notice that all of his pieces are very, very well placed on the queen side, but we notice one odd one out. This knight here on f3 is actually very much restricted. So therefore Capablanca addresses this knight e1, king e8, and knight d3. And once again, that knight is playing on a light square, meaning that it is eyeing up those dark squares. So with the exception of this dark square on e5, which is under great control, we can say that the majority of the dark squares, especially these queenside dark squares, represent a real problem for black. Rook b8, f3, we'll fast forward a few moves, and here white plays rook b3. Notice this rook on b8 may at some point lead to some tactical consequences like rook takes c6. In some situations, black will be able to meet it with bishop d7, but not in all situations. For example, if black plays the move h6, then we can say rook takes c6, b takes c6, rook takes b8. And if bishop to d7, rook takes a6 is a very clever point. The point being that if b takes, rook takes b8 is coming in with check, and so black, well, is unable to exploit the undefended knight on a4. You know, black could have played, for example, a move such as king to f7, which would be a very clever move and probably a top choice of, modern grandmasters. The point being that now this line does not work out well because that knight on a4 is falling. But back then, people did not defend with this kind of tactical precision. So Mieses played the move knight d7, which is designed to simply defend the rook on b8, but of course it's not ideal as it once again locks up the bishop. White now advanced on the king side, and here the final mistake that I want to show you, this move pawn to b5. So again, unless we saw in the first game, right, we saw this move f5, which was created a problem on e5, which Capablanca exploited very well, 15 moves down the line. And here, black is going b5. He already is being targeted because of his excessive control of the light squares at the expense of those dark squares. And now he goes ahead and plays b5, which, is the kind of move that, unless strictly necessary, black really should avoid, because now the c5 square is a permanent outpost, and on top of that, the c6 pawn is permanently backwards. There is also a nasty consequence on the a6 pawn, which after Capablanca's next move, knight ac5, which I should point out is maybe not necessarily even the best move in the position. There, I believe there were some tactics centering around rook takes c6, because if you capture here, rook takes b8, followed by capturing this bishop, which will be undefended once the rook gets taken. But nevertheless, positionally speaking, this move is logical. And although black responded with the move knight to b6, it's not a fair exchange for black to give up the c5 square and also weaken other dark squares such as b4, a5, and just throughout the queenside in order to get squares access to a square like c4, because white still has this pawn on b2, meaning that he will at some point be able to play b3 and cover that c4 square. White here played the move knight to b4, challenging both a6 and c6, and the black position just collapsed. It's effectively collapsed here after bishop to b7, knight takes b7. Finally, that bad bishop moves. The second it moves, it gets captured, and the purpose of capturing it is that white actually picks up a pawn, and with it, the entire black position collapses, not only on the queen side, but also on the center. a6 and d5 are both targeted. Black plays a5, but a little tactical shot. Rook takes b6. The point being that if you play rook takes rook, then knight takes d5 is targeting both rooks, and that's 2 pawns, and with it, the game. For the sake of completeness, I'll show the remaining moves. A takes b4, rook takes b7, rook takes b7, and rook takes b4. And the dust has settled, white is up 2 pawns. a4 is coming up soon, so it may even become a third if black is not careful. But whether or not it becomes a third pawn anytime soon, 2 pawns is too much, and black here, Jack Mieses, actually resigned. So again, a game that I think is quite instructive and with a lot of similarities to the previous game that we saw. And, well, what to say, once again, far too severe weakening of those dark squares in the black position. Exchanging the dark squared bishops to boot aggravates the situation, and eventually we see an infiltration, nice maneuvering by white, and an infiltration along those dark squares, and consequent weakening of the structure, coupled with problems associated with the bishop, which has that development problem similar to the first game, where it's difficult to complete the development because the bishop has to stay back to safeguard the pawns that are on the same color as the bishop. So we saw that, and then eventually this position here, beautifully placed knights on b4 and c5, and a concrete breakthrough, little tactical finish that's very typical. When one player outplays another player positionally, there's usually a little tactical finish, or often a little tactical finish to end matters, and then a resignation here on move 33. So I hope that you have learned quite a bit from these two games. I would say the moral of the story is be very, very careful when you're arranging your pawns in a certain way, because if your pawns are all on the same color, you're going to create weaknesses on the other color. And especially if you're going to do so, be very, very cognizant of what is going on with the bishops, which bishops are being exchanged. If you're going to arrange all your pawns on light squares, as can be seen here, you really, really want to conserve the dark square bishop, ideally. And if you are arranging your pawns like this, as seen by white on e3 and d4, those central pawns on dark squares, then you're especially desiring to conserve the light squared bishop. And we see that in this earlier position, white achieves exactly that. He has his bishop, his light squared bishop, with that pawn chain on the dark squares. Whereas black, he has the light squared bishop, and his pawns are all also on those light squares. So anyway, that concludes game 2. The next few games, actually games 3 through 7, are all going to be Karpov games, and exceptionally instructive games. And the first of the Karpov games is actually going to be a little bit similar to these first two games, in the sense that Karpov's opponent, Judith Polgar, is exploited along precisely the queenside dark squares. So with that said, I shall see you guys there.